The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Financial Rebellion. This is Carolyn Betts. Catherine Austin Fitz-Polly is in Europe. So you were just in the UK, Carolyn, and now Polly's there. And we miss her already, but we have a great show for you. We're going to be talking with Dr. Mark Skidmore about what's going on with the budget shutdown. Very timely. We just shut down this week, and it's definitely in the news, Carolyn. So you and I have been through many of these before, but each one is unique, and the issues coming up in the squabble over the budget are very important. One of the things I believe is they want a digital control grid so that they can, if you're going to cut the budget and cut people's money, you want the fast approaching digital control grid, and there's no doubt that Washington is moving quickly to implement it. And we have lots of discussion about that, including one of the people who's been most aggressive about warning us about the digital control grid and particularly the digital ID is Whitney Webb. And I wanted to just show a clip of what she said recently.
So essentially what this public-private partnership that the WEF is pushing for is for every person's access to the internet to be tied to a digital ID. Or a government-issued ID, but presumably a digital ID, just because of where government-issued ID programs are all going, essentially, around the world. People aren't necessarily going to consent to that unless they are made to believe that anonymity and privacy online are dangerous. So how exactly can you convince people that that needs to happen? Well, you have some sort of event where anonymous hackers do something online that causes major disruption globally, and then the consent can be manufactured through fear and panic, as is often done, that anonymity and privacy needs to be eliminated, that we need to know exactly who is doing what online to prevent a calamity of that scale from ever happening again. And this is the exact solution that these guys have been cooking for a very long time.
There you go. So, as you know, I think if you look at the explosion of data centers and the investment in all the electricity to support them, a lot of that is using digital IDs to achieve financial transaction control. Do we have any more links on digital ID we want to show, Lou? Let's do that. Let's go. The UK, I think the petition against digital IDs is now up to 2.5 million signatures. Carolyn, I don't know if you've seen a more recent figure.
I haven't seen a recent thing, but they're ahead of the United States in all of this.
And they're saying, so this is not just internet access. You can't work unless you have a digital ID. So no income for you unless you get a digital ID. So let's just run the Stammer clip.
And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free of charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. Because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is, we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict.
Yeah, right.
The more problems we have, the more control they need, the more control they get, the more problems we have, and around we go. We also have a clip of the bank closings in Vietnam who is moving to digital transaction control. Okay, Lou, let's run the Vietnam. Yeah, the State Bank of Vietnam has deactivated over 86 million bank accounts now. I've been assured many of these bank accounts are duplications or foreign citizens, but this tells you where this is going. And that's why, of course, we beat the drum, use cash, use cash, use cash. But let's face it, Carolyn, if tomorrow 50% of Americans sort of got up and said, okay, I'm going to use cash as much as possible, we would have a revolution. And
I just got back from my bank. I withdrew $1,000 in cash.
oh boy. Okay, so we're using cash. Okay, with no further ado, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the budget and why that's pushing people to want to have complete control. We have a wonderful guest who's joined us on Financial Rebellion before, Dr. Mark Skidmore, who is the professor and Morris Chair in state and local government finance at Michigan State University. He is a very knowledgeable about budgets, federal, state, and local. He is the person who wrote or did the survey with his students, finding 21 trillion missing from the federal government, and so we've published that. He's talked and written about the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board Statement 56 policy. We'll talk about it today, and many, many things going on in the budget. And so this is someone who's knowledgeable about all sides of the budget, whether it's what's in the news today or what's really going on covertly. So with no further ado, Dr. Mark Skidmore, welcome to Financial Rebellion, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks, Catherine and Carolyn. It's great to be here, and I'm glad you showed those two clips, and in particular Starmer. I thought it was ironic that he said you had a right to work, but it could be taken away if you didn't have a digital ID. So it's really just the privilege to work, right?
I'm not
Right.
clear about whether it's just government jobs or whether it's working in any job.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's if you look at all the different proposals, it's coming down to anything involving a financial transaction or access to the internet is going to be, it's the excuse du jour. Okay, so we're in a shutdown, Mark. What I would love for you to do is explain exactly what's happening right now on the budget and the shutdown, and then walk us through the federal budget and appropriation process. We need a little primer on how the whole budget and appropriation process works so that we can really understand what's going on.
Well, first, the United States is really the only developed country that has this problem of shutdowns over the past 50 years. We've had about 50 shutdowns, and usually they just last a day or two or three. The longest one occurred in 2019 and under the Trump administration, and that lasted 35 days. And so what happens is that non-essential services sort of are set aside, and we don't engage in those activities. Essential services, for example, Social Security payments and those kinds of things continue. But so then there's a list of things that continue. There's a list of things that shut down. A lot of government workers go on furlough. I was supposed to have a meeting on a USDA grant in which a government employee is on our advisory board, and he can't join the meeting. So we put off the meeting, because they're furloughed. So there's a lot of disruption that occurs, and there are reasons for it that could be resolved if we wanted to. Maybe I'll stop there. We can talk about budget processes real quickly next, if you like.
Yeah, so let's start us at the beginning. How does the federal budget get created and monies get appropriated? Walk us through the annual cycle.
Well, the president's office comes up with a budget submission, and then that goes to the Congress and the House and Senate budget committees. And then they kind of massage and work through this process. And if all goes well, so the presidential budget typically, is put out in February of that year. This year, it didn't come out until May. So they were running behind.
So it comes out of the Office of Management and Budget,
Yeah, the OMB.
OMB. Okay.
And then it goes to Congress, and then they go through this process, and depending on their perspectives and priorities, there may be some adjustments, et cetera. And so that can occur for a period of months, and then the appropriation bills should emerge and presumably be approved by Congress before the October 1st new fiscal year.
So help me out. So the budget goes from OMB to Congress, and then the budget committees set the framework. So we have 12 different areas where money is appropriated,
Yeah,
but they set the total amount, the pots, if you will, for those 12 areas. But then their framework goes to the appropriation committees, who then drill down and approve the specific amounts for specific things. Is that right?
that's a great summary.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
It's like a step down function. The OMB proposes the pots, the budget committee finally agrees to the framework, and then now, in the Constitution, it says that appropriations generate from the Congress, from the House. But in fact, in a process sense, the White House makes the first proposal, if you will, as a practical matter.
Right. They set the tone, but
They set the tone.
then
Right.
it goes to Congress for the details.
Right. Now, what you see when the Appropriations Committee goes to work, you have remarkable, so you've got the 12 Appropriation Committee, and they're doing appropriations. Yes, OMB has lobbed out a proposal, but the different agencies care tremendously about what their budget is. And so you have a lot of dialogue back and forth between the appropriation committees and the agencies, as well as OMB. But then all the different people in the country and the world who are impacted by those appropriations also pile in. So you have
Yeah.
lobbyists, you have the associations, you have state and local government, you have the whole world piling in. And the reason it's such an enormous conversation is an extraordinary amount of the US economy has been centralized. And so if you look at 3,100 counties, the impact of the federal budget, county by county, is very, very significant.
Oh yeah, it's well, and there's and the deficit is really important too. The amount of expenditures relative to the revenues coming in, and if you think about what happens in the counties or the states, there's always tax dollars flowing from a county or a state to Washington. And that depends on the wealth and what tax brackets on average fall into each group. So a wealthy county, of course, would pay far more in taxes than a lower income county. At the same time, there are federal dollars flowing back, and state governments are very dependent upon this. Local governments are dependent on. People are dependent on the amount of money flowing in. And because we're running roughly $2 trillion deficits right now, that means that there's more money flowing into a county and more money flowing into a state than is flowing out on average. But that differs from place to place. A low income county or a low income state is going to send fewer tax dollars and receive more. And so all of this matters to a lot of people and a lot of operations. And so they're going to try to chime in and be a part of the action.
So I keep quoting this quote, and I'm reminded because of one of your studies that you did about how much is going out and how much is coming in by the different states, it's a remarkable study. And there's an Idaho senator who said to me when I was just in Idaho for the Idaho Freedom Caucus. And of course, Idaho is the state that passed Leslie Manukian's bill that says no health mandates.
Yeah.
The Idaho Freedom Caucus is quite a remarkable group of state legislators led by Heather Scott. And Anyway, but one of the senators said to me, every year we send $1 to Washington and every year we get 19 cents back. And when I try and enforce the Constitution, my constituents say, oh, I'd rather have the 19 cents. So there's a clear political process of Washington, centralizing the taxes, then dribbling the money back and using that for political control.
There's political control, absolutely. I think that's right. But there's the other part of, some people say we want to have a balanced budget, and maybe we do want to have that. But imagine what would happen to the economy if you just had minus $2 trillion. There would be a massive shock and a recession, and there'd be all kinds of implications. Who knows how far it would go? So whatever you do, you can't just turn off the spigot immediately. And, with the Republicans sort of taking control in January, I anticipated there might be some progress on the $2 trillion deficit. This budget is still the same level, even though there's a reallocation of priorities. The total amount of anticipated deficit spending is still about 1.9 or $2 trillion.
Well, the big beautiful bill was clearly a spending bill,
Yeah.
on huge spending. So as you're right, there's a disagreement about allocation, but there's an agreement that, we should spend in a profligate way.
So, in addition to what kinds of things will go into each category, there's a total amount of spending that's really important, and there's a lot of tension around reducing the amount of spending or increasing taxes to bring that deficit in line, because it has implications for the whole economy.
So if the deficit is 2 trillion, what's the total budget? What's the
roughly the total spending budget is roughly 6 trillion. So that means the total revenues flowing in are roughly 4 trillion.
Okay, so and that's one of the things the president's proposing is more tariffs to bring in more revenue. But if you look at their proposals to bring in more revenue, it's nowhere near enough to close that gap.
No.
No.
I don't know off the top of my head what the anticipated tariff revenues are, but far from solving the issue. And it's an interesting tax, because typically tax and spending decisions are determined by Congress. But in the specific case of tariffs, there is some flexibility for the president to impose tariffs if it's viewed as a matter of national importance and security. So the president's office can, I think there are some court cases looking at the degree to which these tariffs can be imposed. But right now, he's effectively imposing tariffs without congressional approval. But if the administration changes, those tariffs can go away just like that. Whereas with a tax, if you want any kind of tax change, an increase or decrease, it has to go through Congress typically.
Okay. So let's talk about a shutdown. How does a shutdown, if the budget and appropriation process is going forward, and we're supposed to have a new budget by October 1st, that's the beginning of the federal fiscal year, how does this shutdown happen? And also tell us about debt ceiling issues and how they may or may not come up.
Yeah, so there's two things that can happen. One is this shutdown, if there's some sort of impasse happening, or if there's some political benefit associated with shutdowns, and that can be, putting pressure on the president's office, or it could be sending a message to your constituency that you're fighting for them. There are lots of reasons that you might want to have a shutdown, right? If politically. At the same time, there are these costs because we look like we're incompetent, right? We can't seem to get our act together. So it sort of puts a little pressure on everyone when these kinds of things happen, because we just it doesn't look good globally to have this mess on our hands and a discussion occurring. But at the same time, there are these incentives in place so that at times it makes sense to use this lever. So I view a shutdown as kind of a lever, a power to maybe make a point. Maybe you can make some progress in negotiating as the pressure is ramped up. But we end up in a situation where it's not really good for the country as a whole for this to have happened, and yet it happens over and over again.
And the debt ceiling issue, what is that?
Yeah, the debt ceiling is a different matter. Every once in a while, there's a certain debt ceiling that occurs, and I love the graphic there. And then once it hits, once total debt hits that debt ceiling, until, oh, that's a lovely graph too. This represents all the debt ceilings and debt ceilings expansions that are listed right here. And once our debt, hits that point, technically it cannot borrow any more money until the debt ceiling is either expanded or potentially temporarily, put off. And so all of those things happen over and over again. And so when the debt ceiling is hit, unless there is a specific move by government to expand the debt ceiling or temporarily dismiss it, it can't borrow any more money. And so then it has to come up with some way of funding government in this interim period in which it can't borrow any more money. And I don't know if you want to talk about that real quickly here, but I think it's pretty interesting how they do it, and I think inappropriate.
Right. And so what I want to mention is, we have a balance of power where the bankers through the Fed and the New York Fed are supposed to manage monetary policy, and the people's representatives are supposed to manage fiscal policy, which is what the government spending is, the fiscal side of the house. It's the collection of taxes and the spending, and that process depends now totally on the bankers producing the money. Because if you're spending 6 trillion and you're only collecting 4 trillion, you've got a $2 trillion gap, and that's being supplied by the debt going up because we have a debt-based currency. We wouldn't have to. We could have Treasury just issue the currency, but we have a debt-based currency, so that is going up. The interest is becoming a very big part of the budget, but here's the reality. The reality is this all pops up to be the thing that's hurting most Americans most, and that's inflation. So
Right.
could you talk a little bit about how this budget and budget deficit connect to inflation?
Well, before we go there, I just want to add one piece to your excellent summary, and that is every year, not only does the government have to borrow about $2 trillion of new debt, a lot of the old debt has to be reissued because, if it's a 1-year note, in the next year, you have to repay the note. And the only way you can repay that note is to reissue another bond. And so you have all this debt of different age structures, term length structures from 30 years down to a single month. And then internal debt is a totally different animal, which is how Treasury funds the government during a period of hitting that debt ceiling.
Right. And
so this year, not only does it have to borrow roughly 2 trillion, but it also has to borrow an additional, don't quote me on this, but I think it's around $8 trillion
right.
of debt that's turning over. So that's really important.
Right. And what has happened is they've shortened up the maturities trying to get lower interest rates, but they did it when interest rates were low, and now that interest rates are higher, we're in a squeeze. And it's being made worse. One of the plans to finance the government is to use stable coins, and those depend on 93-day less maturities. And so this problem is getting worse, not better.
Yeah, and right now, about $1 trillion is of our total expenditures is for the payment of interest.
Right.
So that tends to push out other types of potential, government activities would be helpful to people.
Right. So excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, inflation. How is this translating into inflation for many people?
Well, there's a number of factors, but during the COVID crisis, we had this massive in, infusion of money, and it was under the guise of a crisis, and so a lot of money went lots of places, and we borrowed trillions, during that period that was funded essentially by money printing, and so that money, instead of staying within the financial system and potentially inflating, things like the stock market, et cetera, it spilled over into the economy. And so that has led to persistent inflation. And I think right now we're having trouble escaping that. And so we've had a higher rate of inflation than we have had in past years.
So I was just looking in money and markets at the Fed statistics, which show us sort of chronically above 3%, their target being 2%. But we also showed the Chapwood Index, which is my favorite for what it means to household budgets. Normally, when we talk about inflation, we talk about monetary inflation. But if you look at the cost of goods inflation at the Chapwood Index, what you see is it's running much, much higher. So if you look at what you or I or what's happening to us at the grocery store or when we pick up essential goods, the inflation is painful. And as a political matter, if you look at the polls, it's, it's the number one economic issue. Well, let's jump.
Well,
Senator,
may I just add one piece to that? Because I'm doing some work on trying to capture inflation in rural places as well as urban places. And I completely agree with you that the consumer price index understates the true inflation rate. So I like to look at other measures as well. But I recently did a survey asking for, with my colleagues, impressions or perceptions of inflation. And as it turns out, we have very different experiences and perceptions. On the one side, some people, for example, if you own your house and you have a fixed mortgage rate, your housing expenses might not be going up in the same way that, say, somebody who has to rent their the place in which they live. Women tend to perceive food inflation more than men. And so, there's a variety of different things in which people experience inflation in different ways. And one really interesting piece is that it depends on, I think, where you get the information as well. Before the election last year, if you identified as a Republican, you perceived inflation as being a major issue. And if you identified as a Democrat, it was much less an issue.
mm-hmm.
And then almost a year later, this summer, we did another survey, and it was with a different frame. The first was with Michigan. The second was with a nationwide survey. But the perception of inflation being a problem among Republicans went down lower than the Democrats. Now, the Democrats perceive inflation as being a more important issue than the Republicans in the two surveys. So,
Wow.
so sometimes we talk about information flow and algorithms and where we get the flow of information. And I think that part of the story here of these shifts and changes is, how this stuff is being expressed and the places that we get our news and our media. So I just think it's very interesting that we have different perceptions of inflation and that it can change potentially.
Is there any possibility of the administrations as they change back and forth, changing how the tap is flowing out?
It's possible,
Right.
And again, I don't want to read too much into it because on the one side, the first survey was of Michigan residents, and the second survey was a nationwide survey. the perceptions appear to have changed. So, and
I, for one, would be fascinated to see the difference between rural and urban. Inflation was one of the reasons I decided to stay in the rural areas. So we'll talk about that later.
yeah,
Anyway, let's turn to Senator Johnson because we are all major fans of Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, who has done remarkable work in a number of areas, including COVID-19, where you've done a lot of work as well. And he has a new proposal for budget reform, which I thought was very thoughtful and reflected a real understanding of the problems. So maybe you could tell us about Senator Johnson's proposal and what you think of it.
well, first, I am also a big fan of Senator Johnson. I just can't tell you how much I respect him, and you know, just using his common sense and then trying to use his position to make things better. So this is just one piece of many things that he has done, I think, to help the country. But his action that he's working on is something called the Eliminate Shutdowns Act, and so he points to the number of shutdowns and how this is kind of a unique U.S. experience that occurs, and his proposal is really simple. All he's saying is, if we have a problem and we have a disagreement on spending priorities, that if we don't get it done before the deadline, that there would be an automatic 2-week continuing resolution that would repeat itself until such a time as the budget was passed. And then in this way, all the agencies wouldn't be held hostage and have to shut down whenever there's a disagreement and we're not working out our differences. And it's pretty simple. It would just be an automatic thing, and it wouldn't increase spending per se, and but it would just enable the basic functions to continue while the lawmakers, hopefully, made arrangements for their disagreements and come up with some sort of solution that would be sufficient.
Now, he's also proposing that the 12 committees, instead of doing 12 one-year proposals, do each committee does a 2-year appropriation, the appropriation committees, and that way the process can focus, the whole Congress and the Senate and House can focus on 6 each year instead of having to do 12 each year, and he feels that will make it easier to get the 6 done.
Yeah, and that is very sensible as well. And so again, very common sense, makes sense. I have no idea who will support or oppose it as the act goes through, the deliberations. Right now, it's been introduced, so we're early in the process. But it's a great proposal. It would help us get through all of this, but it would also take away a lever of control for lawmakers. And it's not clear to me that either some Democrats or Republicans would want to lose that lever.
Well, one of the concerns, Carolyn and I were just at Rogue Food in Ohio, and Congressman Massey spoke and talked about the extraordinary centralization of power into the speaker and the leadership. And I think part of what Senator Johnson is doing is we need to decentralize more power to the members. In my opinion, it's way too centralized into the members, and unfortunately the members, the leadership is, I hate to say this, very influenced by non-domestic donors. So if you look at who the mega donors are, you've got a leadership working for mega donors and the mega rich, and not enough members' voices being heard to represent their constituencies. Okay, so let me jump to some of the long-term, deeper issues on the budget. And I want to talk about 3. I want to talk about your work on the 21 trillion. I want to talk about FASB 56, and I want to talk about credit reform, because Carolyn and I were there once upon a time when one of the reforms was to try and get the portion of the budget related to loans and credits into a situation where you couldn't run up a lot of secret spending and suddenly get surprised as we were with the S&L crisis, for example. Or some of the problems we had, mortgage fraud. We put into place a reform so you couldn't have the kind of mortgage frauds that caused the financial crisis. And so their solution was to throw everybody out and not follow the law. Anyway, but let's start with credit reform. Carolyn, that's our term for the day. Explain to us what credit reform is, and stick with us because we're driving into one of the an arcane part of the budget process, but one that is absolutely critical.
Yes, and credit reform came in under the Credit Reform Act of 1990. There also are appropriations rules that govern non-loan related expenditures over long periods of time, like rent subsidies. And so the whole point of credit reform was to force the Congress to incorporate in the current budget the ramifications of long-term programs, credit programs like FHA guaranteed loans. There are some loans out of DOD. There are big loan programs for all sorts of things that aren't for consumers. And what happens is, let's say you have a 30-year loan, and there will be defaults, there will be recoveries. It's a fairly complex formula, which then has to be brought into current value, and you have to apply that formula in order to determine how much for so much in loans you have to have appropriations for. And there's a number called the credit subsidy as part, and it's scoring. When you hear them talking about scoring, they're talking about doing the formula for determining the credit subsidy, and the credit subsidy is the number that they have to appropriate in order to cover all the eventualities. So there are people fighting over, well, what's the default rate? What's the recovery rate? What's interest? Because all those are factors in doing the calculation, which is just to say it's a very complex process. And our experience when we were working with HUD as the lead financial advisor for the FHA is that the various lobbying groups wanted to understand these numbers better so that they could jockey around and figure out ways to get more money. And initially they didn't really understand the process, and so they were scrambling around trying to figure out how to game the system.
One of my favorite quotes was the old New Jersey street saying, "Make a law, make a business." So,
Right.
right. Okay, credit scoring. Any comment you want to make, Mark, about credit scoring?
No, I'm good.
Yeah. The idea is, let's make sure if we issue credit that we get the full cost in up front rather than let the thing spin out of control as it's done several times in the past.
Well,
Okay.
and the other thing that was sort of manipulated is when we did loan sales, we really increased the recoveries on the defaulted loans, and what the lobbyists want to do is use those good figures, even though they don't want those to take place in the future. So they're trying to use the better recoveries in order to get more appropriations, but then they want to shut down the things that deny the contractors who are making money on the programs being run less with less accountability and less not recovering as much.
Okay, so the way I met you was talking about the undocumentable adjustments at the federal level. One of the problems on the budget on an ongoing basis is that the US government is not complying with the financial management laws that report what they actually are spending. And so we have no way of knowing whether or not appropriations match actual spending because there's no audited financial statements and there's a variety of violations of the federal management and financial laws. And now in 2018, the federal government under Trump adopted FASB 56, which basically allows the federal government to run secret books. So there's in addition to the public discussion of a $2 trillion a year deficit, there's another problem that's running at an even deeper level. And I should say we have a wealth of your writings published at Solari.com, and you've got them published at Lighthouse Economics. Tell us a little bit about the 21 trillion undocumentable adjustments in FASB 56.
Sure. That's been quite a journey, and I want to touch on it and explain it. And but before I do that, I want to just come back to the current budget and the changes that are occurring. And the first thing, and this is something that we talked about before we started the interview, is the flow of dollars to a state or to a county versus the tax dollars coming back depends a lot on the health of the place, the health of the people who live in the place. So the largest component of our federal budget is in healthcare. It's roughly about 1.8 trillion in total. And so a place that has a higher level of disability, which is sort of a overall measure of the health of the place, will be reliant on health-related expenditures coming from the federal government. So a key part of this whole budget issue is that our health just isn't that great, and the costs of receiving healthcare are much higher than most other places and every other place in the world. So with this being a CHD event, I think that really should be emphasized here. That's a really big issue. So if we can help people become more healthy, the burden on the federal government will go down substantially.
So one of your recent analyses, and we did a show on Financial Rebellion about this, is that if we went back to 2010 levels of disability, we could drop the HHS budget $500 billion.
Yeah, that was the estimate. And the way I think about it is there's a continuum of well-being, and and there are some types of disabilities, for example, hearing loss or something, where you can maintain a lifestyle, et cetera. But there are other kinds of disabilities that may prevent you from working, may prevent you from being as productive and as you could be, et cetera. And you are required to have a lot of spending. So as more people on this, sort of continuum of health become disabled, there's more people who require healthcare expenditures. So it's sort of like a shifting over of all of that burden. And so as people become less healthy, the cost of providing healthcare tends to rise. And that was the estimate. We could maybe save as much as 500 billion if we could return to the level of health that we were before.
Right, it's extraordinary. So let's just look at the numbers again. 1.8 trillion at HHS last year, and the military budget was at 850 billion. So more than double the military budget.
Yeah.
And I think more than double the interest expense. So this is an explosive part of the budget. And I know Carolyn and I'm sure you have been watching the different testimony and confirmation hearings in Washington to discuss the chronic health epidemic, is what what the HHS secretary has called it. And what's been remarkable to me is because this is at the heart of the budget issues, has been the unwillingness of many members of Congress to address it in a problem-solving way. In other words, they are attacking HHS Secretary Kennedy and his people for their proposals to try to solve the epidemic, or to analyze what's causing the epidemic, but there's no embracing of, oh, there's an epidemic, we have a problem, we have to solve this, including the budget aspects of this problem. So there's a failure to just have a consensus that there is a problem and we need to do something about it. Would you say that's fair?
Absolutely. I mean, we have, an epidemic of autism, and super important because the cost of caring for somebody who has a neurological injury is so costly to the family and to society as a whole, and lost productivity and costs of caring, healthcare costs, a whole range of issues. So it's really it's very sad for the person and the family, but it also has these sort of national implications. In
It's
addition,
not just a cost, though. It's also lost taxes. People who
sure,
work are not paying income taxes.
you're right. And the second epidemic that we have that is really devastating as well is diabetes.
Right.
And most diabetes can be avoided and can be addressed. But right now we have a system in place that a food system and other systems in place that are leading to this, um, and so it's avoidable. It's something that we can fix, and it would save us, families and society, a lot of money.
Right. And I would just mention one of the things that I don't think is yet understood at the state and local level is the extent to which this epidemic is going to hit their financial statements, particularly the pension fund systems, because the state pension funds have usually done a reasonably good job of funding their pension benefits, but not their health care.
Right.
To a certain extent, they're depending on the federal government, and I don't see how the federal government is going to fund that. So we've got a big hole, and what we've watched since the change of administrations, as Kennedy has tried to shine a spotlight on this, what I'm seeing is an almost complete refusal by Washington in both the food area and the pharmaceutical area to face the reality of what has to be done.
Yeah, agreed.
Right. So, and even if you look at what Kennedy can get through the policy process, it's nowhere near what we need to really have jump the curve solutions that can give us budget relief here.
Yeah. And incentives are really important. Right now, if you can, if the system can address symptoms and not the underlying causes, that is a moneymaker for the insurance and the health sectors. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but if you have chronic conditions and you need, in order to function, you need medications, you have problems that you regularly go to, that is an avoidable expense, but it drains the family of resources, and so and those resources could be used for other things, and so there's an important economic trade-off that's occurring right now.
So one of the reasons, one of the ways we see the administration dealing with healthcare, explosive healthcare costs, I want to mention two things. One is they're basically talking about throwing a whole bunch of people off of Medicaid.
Yeah.
So the solution is, okay, let's just pull the rug out from under poor people, and the Democrats are saying, wait, that's not fair.
The
So
other thing that is ending this year is a tax credit to help low-income families pay for health care. And so that doesn't go directly into the expenditure budget, but it has an impact on tax dollars paid, and how much net tax dollars flow in. And so that's another sticking point as well.
right. But to me that now what's interesting is Carolyn and I just did a financial rebellion with a wonderful toxicologist from Florida who's been working to stop the basic pesticide liability that Monsanto and Bayer and the
Yeah.
pesticide makers are pushing. And essentially what the toxicologist said at the end of the interview is if they get this, and there's a lot of work at both the state and federal level to try and get it, we're looking, because of the impact on fertility, we are looking at an extinction level event. So, so if you look at a lot of the policies being pushed, there's no, I would say Congress is not addressing the root causes and proposing real root fixes. If anything, if you look at what's happening with pesticide, they're about to make it much worse.
Wow. Yeah, those are challenges for sure. Thank goodness we have some warriors out there who are fighting for us.
So let's get back to the relationship to the push for digital control grid. You can see why the mega rich, who seem to have more and more power in the political process in Washington, might want to insert complete digital control. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I've been sort of thinking about this issue, and a lot of your work has had a big influence on me in this regard. And there's this, you know, there's this push to move towards purely digital money, and there's a push to have these individual digital IDs. And if you can get those two things together, you have a control grid in place. And I just don't trust, even with good intentions, it's too much power to put all together. And and then I just saw a recent report that Bill Gates funded electronic tattoos that are permanent, that can be placed on people, and you can store all of your information, all your relevant information right there, and being sold again as a convenience and something that would improve your life as the next step from moving from phones to something that would be on your
So,
body.
so the quote I saw was Gates saying, "Oh, the smartphone will go the way of," I forget what it was. It'll go the way of the Model T Ford, because we can just put it under your skin now. It's all very convenient and wonderful.
And my hope and prayer is that people will have learned from the COVID experience and from other experiences that this is not, the only way all of this can happen is if we accept it. And
Right.
so we have to choose corporately, that's not how we want to live our lives. And so the more we can do to share that information and help people understand, the better.
So we are coming out this weekend with a repackaging of a wonderful proposal, and something that's been done by Susan Luchas from South Dakota, who runs our Team Cash. And each year, instead of giving out candy at Halloween, again, we're back to the sugar and diabetes problem, she gives out a dollar bill. And on the dollar bill, she makes a little thing, and you can print it out from Team Cash at her website, and it shows, here's why you should use cash.
Oh, wow.
What she says is, if you will give out dollar bills, she also gives out a little pocket constitution with it as well. She said, if you will give out a dollar bill, you won't poison the kids with sugar, right? And you will have the most popular house in the neighborhood on Halloween. So get ready to get some dollar bills. And
Great,
and
great
yes,
idea.
and she said, what's interesting is, if you explain to the kids why they should use cash based on the label on the dollar, they will really go home and tell their parents to use cash. And so I don't know how many kids you can reach at Halloween, 50, 100, 200. But imagine if thousands of people did this for Halloween. We would reverse the great poisoning, right? Because they'd get dollars instead of sugar. And we could start getting everybody using cash, because I happen to believe that this can only happen. You need a digital ID, and you need 100% digital financial transaction system. But if we can keep cash alive in high enough percentages, it's going to be much harder to implement.
I agree. Any steps that we can take. I love the creativity of this person. So my children are adults now, but I'm always saying, hey, why don't you use cash? They're like,
Mhm.
it's easier just to have the electronic, just transfer it. And I'm like, no,
Kids come to your home for Halloween?
no, not for Halloween. Just
For Halloween? Okay.
not for Halloween. I'm just talking about my own adult children, encouraging them to use cash when they can. You know.
So another thing we need to do, and I do think this is a budget issue, is if everyone could rediscover and support their local farmers, so their local farmers can get the retail price and build strength in the local fresh food system. One, we're going to get healthier, but I think it also decentralizes the food system in a way that is critical to stopping some of this sort of central control. Carolyn, maybe you could say a word, just 1 minute, about Rogue Food and what happened at Rogue Food.
Well, one thing that I learned at Rogue Food is that of a dollar spent on farm products, the farmer gets 8 cents. So that's why you need to buy retail. Give the farmers the retail price. And we have a farm crisis. The average farmer is 57, 58 years old. And it's getting very difficult, for particularly with the interest rates, for young people to buy the farms. So there's no way for the 57-year-old to pass on the farm to the next generation. So more and more, we're losing huge amount of our family farms to big ag, and big ag is poisoning us. So
Right, absolutely. And if they get that liability, it's going to get much, much worse. I just kept,
liability protection, yeah.
I've been having to fly to do some of the meet and greets we're doing around the United States, and you can't eat in the airports. It's just frightening what's there. Anyway, so Dr. Skidmore, I can't thank you enough for briefing us on the budget. Great work you're doing. Just tell us a little bit how to find your website and follow your work.
Sure. Earlier you mentioned the inability of our government to actually track spending. So I just wanted to say a quick thing about that, just to follow up with that. And what you highlighted and what I kind of jumped in on and tried to systematically help highlight was the fact that we're supposed to be able to track all spending that occurs. And we don't, especially in the Department of Defense and to some degree, housing and urban development. There are all kinds of accounting transactions that are unverified. And so you mentioned the 21 trillion. Over the 1998 to 2016 period, there were many $21 trillion in transactions that our own government said we couldn't track. We didn't know what they were for. And we haven't fixed it yet. And instead of fixing it, we imposed accounting standard 56, which basically says we can have two sets of books. We can have one for the public and then a real one. And this one for the public can be doctored in ways that are unreported. And so we don't really know what the situation is.
Right. And unfortunately, if you look at how it along with the national security laws and classification laws, extends to some of the big banks and corporations doing business with the government. I hate to say this, but if you look at the US large cap stock and bond market, it's hard to know what it means. Anyway, great show. Lighthouse Economics, great.
Yeah, I try to post updates on things that I think are relevant and important at Lighthouse Economics. The website is mark-skidmore.com.
It's great.
Skidmore.com. So
it's great. I can't recommend Dr. Skidmore and his work enough. Thank you. Let's just mention two things coming up really exciting. We have streaming at CHD TV, a Omnivore Symposium, Patrick Wood, David Hughes, Lissa Johnson, Daniel Brody, a great team that's coming up this weekend. Digital Tack on Humanity. Oh, Jacob Nodergaard's going to be with him instead of Lissa, I see. Okay, this is the third of the Omnivore Symposiums. If you haven't seen the first two, I recommend them very strongly. And this one is the third. And then Carolyn and I are going to see some of you at the CHD conference in Texas. We're going to be staying with Polly. It's exciting. There's a huge lineup. Check up the speakers. It's extraordinary lineup. Carolyn, we're going to get to hang out with Suzanne Humphreys at Polly's house. So we're looking forward to that. And Senator Ron Johnson will be addressing the group, as well as Senator Rand Paul, 2 senators. So Leslie Manookian, Brian Hooker, just a wonderful lineup. Any other thoughts, Carolyn, before we close?
No, I look forward to seeing some of our subscribers, and we're also going to be at Weston Price Foundation Conference, which is all about good food too.
Yeah, October's going to be a busy month. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Financial Rebellion. Thank you, Dr. Mark Skidmore. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
My name is Cynthia McCluskey, and right before I got pregnant with my son, I was working at a hospital, and it was required that you do the hepatitis B. And so
To work in hospital?
Yes. And so the infectious control nurse gave me the Hep B vaccine, and in less than an hour I had a fever of 105.7.
You did?
Yes. And it was reported to the CDC, and they said I should never have that vaccine again. It took me 2 days with a really high fever, and then I was fine. And you would think that I would have thought about that when I got pregnant, because I was pregnant right after that, but I didn't. So on the day that he was born, he was vaccinated with the Hep B, and he had this horrible rash all over his entire body for a couple weeks that the doctors couldn't explain. And you would have thought, like, maybe I would have thought about that then. But no, I didn't. So I actually stood in line, because our insurance didn't cover vaccines, to get him vaccinated every 2 months. And the lines were long, like 2-3 hours. And so when he turned 14 months, he had a cold, and we gave him 9 vaccines. He was an early walker-talker, so he was walking at 7 months. Two-word combination at 10 months. And at 14 months, he lost all of his language. He was hospitalized. They thought he had a perforated liver, and he was rushed to Phoenix Children's Hospital, and they had a surgeon there. They were going to do surgery on him. When they did a CAT scan and realized it wasn't a perforated liver, and he had some liver enzyme problem that they couldn't explain, and at the end of 4 days we left the hospital and he had a diagnosis of autism. He had no language, he was headbanging, he was just a completely different child. And I didn't even then I didn't put it together about the vaccines. I just totally trusted. And I went when he was 2.5, and I heard a doctor talk about vaccines, and for the first time I heard the truth. And I was so upset that I had to leave, and I was in the parking lot, and I cried so hard that I sat in the middle of the parking lot, and a woman who I didn't even know came up and sat down with me and cried with me for, it felt like hours. And that's when I first discovered Dr. Wakefield. And that's when I first discovered biomedical treatment of autism. And my kid is 18. He no longer has autism. He was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine and on Good Morning America. And it's been proven.
But why was he on the cover?
Because he's officially recovered.
Oh, I see. Congratulations. Got
Thank
it.
you. So
Did they let you talk about the vaccine injury when he was on the?
I did. They didn't use any of it, of course,
they
because you know how
recorded
they are. But so he was in the Dr. Fine Good Outcome study, so it's been proven that he did have autism and he lost his diagnosis. And so a lot of people say he never had it or he still has it, and they want to deny our story, which is that
We don't deny your story.
I know, and I thank you for that. And actually, Dr. Wakefield is my son's personal hero, and he's met him several times, and we owe everything to him for fighting for the truth for our family. So, and we are just so grateful for this film, because the other vaccine films were hard to share with families and get them to listen. But this is really about corruption, which somehow people are more willing to listen to first. So I found that families that wouldn't listen to me before would watch this film and think about it, like really think.
What did you, when you said you got the Hep B shot because you worked in a hospital, what did you do in hospital?
I was in HR. I did nothing with patients at all. Like, there was no reason for me really to have it. It was just required. Because of course they like to force you to do everything according to one mandate.
Great big bullies is what they are.
Are. They
you
are
going to find a bus.
And so we have a naturopath and we don't see regular doctors anymore.
Stay away.
That's right.
History doesn't wait. This is our moment to rise, unite, and reclaim our children's health.
Join us here in Austin, Texas this November at the Children's Health Defense Conference.
In the wake of unprecedented medical overreach and censorship, the world is waking up, and people like you are leading the way.
We're at a turning point in history. With the pandemic behind us, our fight for freedom and health has reached the global stage.
This is our moment of truth, and we're ready to seize it together.
And Children's Health Defense has been at the forefront of this charge. Our 2025 conference brings together the leaders, visionaries, and warriors who made it happen.
Meet the parents whose lives were forever changed, and hear from doctors who risked everything to speak out. Stand with those who refused to be silenced.
You are going to hear from world-renowned speakers, doctors, and frontline leaders driving the medical freedom movement.
Discover real-world solutions grounded in science, integrity, and human rights.
Join the discussion to talk about vaccines, informed consent, parental rights, and so much more.
And you'll of course hear from your favorite CHD personalities, sharing the latest on CHD's research, litigation, and outreach.
And while you're there, soak up the energy, culture, and music of beautiful Austin, Texas.
Whether you're a parent, a practitioner, or a medical freedom advocate, this is your call to action to protect what matters most.
Be part of the movement that is rewriting the story for generations to come.
So please join us.
Join us.
Join us. Let's make history together in Austin.